Good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to everybody to the webinar on sustainability reporting, introducing the methodology for SDG indicator 12.6.1. My name is Elisa Tonda, and I work at UNEP, the UN Environment Program, heading the team working on sustainable consumption and production. First of all, let me thank all of you for the time that you have decided today to dedicate to this session. And I would also like to thank the Secretariat of the One Planet Network that has been offering to all of us who will be intervening during the webinar today the opportunity to be exchanging with all of you who are connected. During this 1-hour session, we will try to dive deep and look in depth at a specific target of the Sustainable Development Goal, target 12.6, which is squarely part of a goal looking at sustainable consumption and production. And it is a target that really makes a very explicit link to the role that businesses play in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The discussions that we will be having with you today in the course of the webinar will look at how we can best capture existing effort by businesses towards the SDG indicator 12.6.1. And across our discussions of today, we will be going through an agenda which will allow us to assess the methodological development which has been taking place so far, a methodological development that has been led by the 2 co-custodian agencies for the indicator. And those 2 co-custodian agencies are UNEP, the UN Environment Program, and UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development. Both organizations will be represented during the webinar. And allow me to move to the next slide in the presentation that will show the agenda, provided I'm good at moving the presentation to the next slide. In the slide of the agenda, you will see what we will be going through in the course of the session of today. One of our colleagues, expert within UNEP on Sustainable Development Goals, Gillian Campbell from the SDGs unit in UNEP, will remind us the SDG process and specifically the process of development of the indicator for SDG 12.6.1. An expert from the Consumption and Production Unit, Anna Thorstendottir, will lead us a little bit more in depth on the substance and the technicalities of the indicator. We will then have an opportunity through the intervention of Richard Rothenberg, Executive Director of Global AI, to dive deeper on the mechanism for collecting information on the indicator. And the session of today will be concluded by an intervention of our partner of the co-custodian agency, UNCTAD, Elena Botvina, who is an economic affairs officer at UNCTAD, on the next steps in moving ahead on this specific indicator. At the end of the presentation, you will all have a chance to ask your questions to the panelists involved during the webinar today. And please, also throughout the session, do take time to start writing your questions to the panelists in the question box. We will continue monitoring the question box and we will raise all your questions at the end of the presentation. And we are now moving directly to the first segment of the presentation, which will take us through the SDGs process. And I give to my colleague Gillian the floor for the intervention.
Thank you, Elisa. So if we can just go to the next slide. the one after this. Then I'll take
Gillian,
you
the floor
through the
is
SDG
yours.
process for those of you who are not. Can you hear me? I have my mic on. Elisa, can you not hear me?
We can hear you, Gillian.
Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Oh, okay, go to the next slide then. Great. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll walk you through the SDG process for those of you who are not familiar with it. So the next slide. So I don't know who's controlling the slides, or if anybody's controlling the slides.
I personally cannot hear you.
Yeah.
I'm just checking whether the other panelists can.
Yes, Elisa, this is Fabienne. We can hear Gillian. So maybe well, we're trying to sort this out, and everybody can hear her. So if you don't mind moving the slide, and in the meantime,
Absolutely.
we'll try to. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'll also type next slide every time. Okay. So anyway, so the SDGs include 17 goals, 169 targets, and 244 indicators. And what we're going to be really talking about today is the process around the indicators, and specifically the process that led to the development of SDG 1261, which is the indicator that we're talking about here in terms of corporate sustainability reporting. And so what I want to say here is that the SDG goals and targets and indicators have all been agreed by the HLPF and the General Assembly at this point. And so this represents a globally agreed set of priority areas in terms of the targets and priority indicators in terms of how these will be measured. And so this is sort of where we got the mandate to start working on this. Was once the General Assembly agreed on these different targets and indicators, then it was left to different agencies to try to figure out, well, specifically, how are we going to measure these? How are we going to actually track these? What's useful for countries? What's useful in terms of tracking global progress, but also what's useful in terms of providing national stakeholders with the information that they need. So if you go to the next slide, then as I said, the SDG goals and targets were set by member states with the adoption of the 2030 agenda. And then the Statistical Commission was the one that developed the monitoring framework. And this monitoring framework is something that they established a working group, which was member state led, to lead the development of. And each indicator was assigned to a UN custodian agency to develop the monitoring framework. And for the indicator on 12.6.1, which is again corporate sustainability reporting, UN Environment Program and UNCTAD were assigned as the custodian. So what this means is that we were officially given the mandate to design the methodology for measuring corporate sustainability reporting in the context of the SDGs. And even though we were we were given the mandate to design this methodology, it doesn't mean that they just handed it over to us completely. We did have to go through a formal process to get this methodology approved, which is this interagency and expert group on the SDG indicators. And at this point, the methodology has been approved by members. So the methodology that we're presenting today represents the agreed methodology for monitoring corporate sustainability reporting in the context of the SDGs. Next slide. So I just quickly wanted to say there is a lot of confusion on how SDG reporting actually works. And so a lot of people believe that the national data directly goes into the annual progress reporting on the SDGs or into the SDG global database, which is maintained. This is actually not the case. So the way that it works is that national data goes to custodian agencies like UNEP and UNCTAD, And then harmonization is done, and sometimes estimation is done, so that we can make sure that we have a comparable set of information that is useful for tracking macro trends. And so this is the logic behind the methodology that we're presenting today, is that we want something that not only works for one specific circumstance, but it works across the international community. So if you go to the next slide. Thank you. So, so again, in terms of this indicator, just to summarize, we were responsible for developing the methodology. We're responsible for designing the data collection mechanism, which we're working on now, which would bring together both national data sources and also international data sources. We also have a role in terms of building capacity to compile this sort of information and conduct analysis on corporate sustainability reporting. So trying to really work with stakeholders such as yourself to tell a story. What does this mean? If you have this many large companies and this many small and medium enterprises reporting 1 year, then what would be a realistic goal for you to set in terms of increasing your reporting, in terms of building a culture of corporate sustainability among your private sector? And so this is where we hope to go with this and what we hope this information is useful for. And then we also, of course, do analysis of macro trends for the annual SDG report and for the global SDG database. Next slide. And so you can skip to the next slide also. So I just want to say that the actual indicator that we have is under target 12.6, which is on encouraging companies to adopt sustainable practices and sustainability reporting. And the indicator is the number of companies publishing sustainability reports. And so here I want to mention that we are looking at the number of companies that publish what we are going to classify as a sustainability report. We are aware of the fact that the quality of these reports and the actual implementation may vary. However, tracking this type of information is something that is more difficult, and it requires a lot of extra effort, which we are also trying to provide advice on, but it's not feasible at the current time to monitor as much on quality at the global level. And so we have really focused on this indicator as it is elaborated here, which is the number of companies. And we do think that it is useful, though, for countries and for individual partner agencies to do additional research on the actual quality of the reports. And so the last slide for me, if you go to the next one, this just outlines how long it took us to develop this, just so you are aware. I mean, we did develop this methodology over the course of the last few years. We worked on it in collaboration with a lot of different partners. There was an expert group that was involved in the production of this methodological development. We've done piloting in different countries. And in the end, as I said, we submitted it to the member state only group underneath the Statistical Commission, which is the IAG SDGs, and they endorsed the methodology in 2019, in September 2019. And so now we're working to try to roll this methodology out. And so this is what we're going to be talking to you about today, is how do we actually see this moving forward. So now I'll hand back over to you, Elisa.
Thank you very much, Gillian. Thank you for this very clear overview. And I'm now going to give the floor to Hannah, who will be delivering the next part of the presentation, that is diving much deeper into the content and the technicalities of the methodology. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisa. Could I have the next slide, please? So I would like to give you some insight into the content of the methodology. But before starting, I wanted to inform you that you will find the link to the current version or to the approved version of the methodology document at the end of the slides that we will then share with you after the webinar. But I also wanted to note that the document is currently undergoing some refinements, notably to reflect developments of the global platform that will be presented after my intervention. So, but just to tell you that you will see the full document after this webinar, so you can dig into the content yourself if you're interested. But I will now dig into the slide and the content of the methodology. Now, in the methodology, the word sustainability report can refer to a standalone sustainability report, or it can refer to information on sustainability, which is integrated in a company's annual report or an integrated report. So it's not just the sustainability reports that we're talking about here. It is important to note that not every single report that is called sustainability report will necessarily be eligible to be counted under the indicator. There are some minimum requirements that will need to be met, which I will discuss further in the following slides. Now, instead of simply counting reports, the goal of the methodology is also to help enhance the quality of sustainability reporting and to encourage companies to strive for gradual improvements. So it's not just really just to count the reports, but we also want to use this opportunity to try to improve the quality of sustainability reporting in general. Now, another important point to highlight is that the methodology is developed in line with existing reporting frameworks and does not attempt to create a new reporting framework. And this is a very important point to highlight. Could I have the next slide, please, Elisa? Thank you. The methodology document puts forward a core set of governance, economic, environmental, and social disclosures, which are considered to be a minimum requirement for a report to be eligible to be counted under the indicator. Now, on the slide, you can see the list of governance or institutional and governance, as we've called it there, as noted, and we also see the economic areas. Now, I won't go through them all, but for example, a company will need to conduct a materiality assessment and publish information on its sustainability strategy, as well as key impacts, risks, and opportunities, just to name a few. You can see more on the slide. In terms of economic disclosures, the minimum requirement is to report on the direct and indirect economic performance. That would be information on revenues, profit, and community investments, for example. Now, again, the choice of the minimum requirements aligns with what is required in existing sustainability reporting frameworks. So this is not something that was just made up on the go, but really refers to the existing frameworks. Now, the so-called comply or explain principle that some of you will have heard of will apply to these minimum requirements, meaning that if a company is not reporting on some of these areas, it should explain why not. It should be noted, however, that the comply or explain principle cannot be applied if an area has been determined as material for the company strategy and sustainability, which will have been determined then through a materiality assessment. But the reason for applying the comply and explain principle is principally to ensure that small and medium-sized companies that may lack the means for producing extensive reports are not discouraged from disclosing sustainability information. So it's really to make sure that everybody feels that they can be included in the sustainability reporting. That they can issue sustainability reports without having to overly put too much effort that they may not be able to do, and rather focus on gradual improvements. Could I have the next slide, please, Elisa? Thank you. Now, following the same principles of aligning with the requirement of key sustainability reporting frameworks, on the slide you will see the minimum requirement disclosures for environmental and social issues as reflected in the methodology document. Now, in terms of the environmental impacts, these are, for example, information on the company's greenhouse gas emissions, energy and water consumption, as well as waste generation. And on the social side, the minimum requirements concern areas such as health and safety measures, employee training, and information on diversity and equal rights. I'm not going to go into all of these, but you will see the main ones there on the slide. Could I have the next slide, please? So while the methodology does put forward the minimum disclosures, as I just discussed, the goal of the methodology is not to give the impression that this is enough, but rather to encourage more enhanced reporting and improve performance of companies over time. This is why the methodology also includes advanced level requirements, and these concern disclosures on topics such as stakeholder engagement and supply chain management, which then includes social environmental assessment of suppliers, as well as disclosure methods that help monitor company progress over time. And these will be, for example, using the intensity of greenhouse gas emissions and intensity of water use and waste generation, which is more meaningful information to track progress than only looking at the absolute number of emissions, water use, and waste generation, just to take a few examples. Now, that was all the information I wanted to share with you today. So I will now give the floor to the next speaker, who is Richard Rodenberg, who is the Executive Director of our data partner, Global AI.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to speak about the data collection mechanism for this indicator 12.6.1. If we could please go to the next slide. So essentially, we're going to have a workflow that includes two different streams. One uses a combination of machine learning and natural language processing to analyze reports submitted by companies and basically use the minimum and advanced requirement to assess if they qualify to be counted for the indicator. And this is going to be done in multiple languages. We're looking, besides English, we're looking at French, Russian, Spanish, among others. And the second stream relates to a survey-based mechanism, which is going to be particularly important for companies that typically do not report or do not have the capacity to report, particularly small and medium size companies. And this process will also enable us to push for the harmonization of specific units in the indicators, which will allow us to do to work on the alignment between macro SDG indicators and micro indicators at the company level. In the next slide, we have a diagram that explains the main phases of the project. The first one, as explained earlier, is the data collection. And basically the algorithm are going to be looking at global databases in addition to country-specific databases, as well as survey mechanism, and it's also going to give the option for upload. So companies, if they haven't submitted the report to a global database or regional or national, they will have the option to upload the report so it can be analyzed and assessed to be counted towards the indicator. The second stage is the analytics. Here is where we use the AI-driven methods to evaluate the content of the report based on the minimum and advanced requirements. And essentially, we're going to have a point system where the report has to contain a minimum threshold of content in regards to the minimum and advanced level requirements to be counted. After the analytics, we'll have the data aggregation, where we will take all the results for a given year to be aggregated at the sub-regional, regional, and global, as well as the country level. And on the fourth phase, reporting, these results will be submitted for the global SDG database for the indicator 12.6.1, as well as the voluntary national reviews, the BNRs, where countries submit to the UN for the high-level political forum to inform about how their national policies align with the SDGs. Now if we can go to the next slide. So in here I'm gonna speak in more detail about the survey-based mechanism. So as mentioned earlier, we have two direct submission mechanisms. One is direct upload, where companies upload their report on a web link. And the second method is survey, which is illustrated here, where the country sends a list to companies in their specific jurisdiction. And this link contains an automated survey, which is going to collect information on the minimum advance requirement, and it's going to assess various features of the responses, which includes degree of completion, in order to evaluate if they're valid responses, and thus upload it to a database which aggregates the content so it can be analyzed to determine data gaps and trends over time. And now we can go to the next slide. So this is an example of data mining technology, which we have used previously. And some of these results were published by the UNCTAD Statistics Division. And in here, we analyze several thousand companies from more than 100 countries to determine at a very granular level their degree of completeness based on the global core indicators defined by the UNCTAD ISAR. Here in particular, we can see the results in the heat map divided by industrial sector. And we also have these results divided by country and region. And this is a similar technology that we will apply to analyze a much larger number of companies around the world to determine their compliance towards minimum and advanced requirements. And that's it for my part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard, for the intervention. And we will now give the floor to our colleague Elena, who will be covering the last part of the presentation that looks into the next step. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you much, Elisa. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start with thanking our colleagues from UNEP for inviting us to participate in this webinar. UNCTAD is United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, and as it was already mentioned by Gillian, we are co-custodians of the indicator 1261. And we cooperated obviously with the colleagues and UNEP on developing the metadata guidance, methodology for measuring the indicators, as well as designing data collection mechanism. Next slide, please, Lisa, if possible. The other way, I think. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we're now moving to the next phase of the pilot testing of the mechanism, and we will validate it through practical implementation both of the global data screening and direct submission via automated reporting that was very well explained by Richard earlier. There's a number of countries who already expressed their interest and agreed to participate in this activity. You can see some of them on the screen. For example, a few of them, Ukraine, Guatemala, and we are in progress of negotiations with South Africa and Colombia at the moment, and hope to cover some of the European countries at the later stages. And therefore, Richard already mentioned that we'll have a few related languages, 4 UN languages, English, Spanish, French, and Russian for the initial stage, but of course the system allows to expand language capacity and add other languages for both for the interface and for the data screening functionalities. For the pilot testing, we cooperate in the member states with such stakeholders as national statisticians, focal points responsible for preparing the VNRs, associations for big businesses and SMEs, authorities responsible for managing corporate registry in the country, and of course, it's always an individual case for each country. By June, we plan to have initial results prepared that may lead us to advancement of the data collection mechanism and as well as update of the methodology. And we will then continue to replicate the process in other regions to enable aggregation of data across the world for the next reporting period in 2021 to contribute to the global SDGs report that are normally presented at the high-level political forum in July each year. And additionally, as a side note, I would also like to mention that UNCTAD is arranging capacity building and technical assistance via development account project on enabling policy framework for enterprise sustainability and SDG reporting to help companies to publish and prepare useful sustainability reports and to support governments also in measuring the impact of the private sector on SDGs. And we now work with Guatemala and Colombia in Latin America and Kenya and South Africa in African region. And we will replicate this in other regions at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena, for this overview of what is going to come next. And we are finally getting to the session during which you participants will be more protagonists for the session, for the discussion. And I just want to jump one slide more, just to reconfirm that some of the sources of information that were mentioned earlier during the presentation, the link to access those sources of information is there in the very last slide of the presentation that you will receive at the conclusion of the session. And I'm now asking for the support of our colleague Fabienne from the Secretariat of the One Planet Network to enable us to all discuss with you participants in the session and address your questions for clarification and other questions. Fabienne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elisa, and hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. So for this questions and answer session, I have already received a number of questions in writing, but I think we have enough time to open the floor to participants. While I'm doing this, I'm going to invite those of you who have asked questions already to speak up. But in the meantime, you can all see that you have a little hand in your control panel. So this is to indicate that you would also like to ask a question in case you would like to add to the discussion, and in case we have a bit more time. But if I may, so so far we've received questions on let's say 3 topics. The first one is more around the validation process and and how this works for validating in a way the reports. There's then a series of questions on the upload of data and the process behind that, so probably more for Richard, and a few questions on the piloting. So for the first series of questions, can I ask, I think this is Kelly, to take the floor. You had questions on sectors and cross-checking. Can you hear me and can you speak up? Please introduce yourself when you take the floor. Thanks.
Sure. Hi, everybody. This is Kelly from Fair Trade International. And I had a question which the last speaker was already addressing in terms of how the analysis of the different sectors is being reported through the Secretary General's annual report or the SDG report, in particular regarding high-risk sectors such as extractive industries, transport, commodity, and trade. And linked to that also, how is the reporting that you're analyzing aligning with the requirements under the UN Guiding Principle of Business and Human Rights, particularly regarding human rights due diligence and growing demand from national legislation for companies to report, such as in the UK, the Modern Slavery Act. So it'd be good to hear how those reports are being captured as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. You made reference to the last speaker. Would that be Elena that maybe could kickstart the reply? And I'll ask Hannah and Gillian if they want to complement. Elena, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Shall I start with the validation of the mechanism, or shall I respond to the last question?
I think you could try and cover all, and then we will be asking Gillian and Hannah to step in, if that's okay for you.
Yes, absolutely. It's just to explain that since there were some questions regarding the validation of those mechanisms, it's more like testing the functionality, working on the challenges together with the countries within the pilot testing. In regard to the specific industries, we do have a term on disaggregation of data by industries. And definitely it will be reflected in the aggregated reports and data that will go to the SDG overview global reports. In regards to the terms and standards that, for example, the business and human rights standards, I think it is worth mentioning that it was part of the methodology design process that we try to take into consideration all existing frameworks, including all the standard setters, and of course the main stakeholders within the UN system, including UN Global Compact and the human rights principles as well. And this is very well covered in the social dimension of the minimum and advanced requirements that you may get familiarize yourself later following the link that was shared on one of the slides.
Gillian, would there be elements you would like to complement on this reply?
I mean, Hannah is certainly probably in a better position to talk about the specific criteria that was used. So maybe she answers first, and if there's anything to add.
Let's do so. Hannah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, I think it's just important to point out, as Elena did, that there were the key reporting frameworks and guidance was consulted while making the methodology document. But I think, as I discussed also in my intervention, that we would want to see better reporting. I think we all agree on that. So I think with time, but you can correct me, Elisa and Gillian, with time, I would see also the methodology being updated if it's seen to not be capturing the what is being reported. But I don't know, Lisa and Gillian, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I would say that since we're talking about reporting until at least 2030, that there will be a lot that will have changed by then, we hope. So yeah, I think that covers it from my end. But maybe Elisa and Gillian, you could correct me if I'm wrong with the sort of the potential update of the methodology to reflect the current reporting.
So yeah, so I think I'll add a little bit onto this. As was mentioned by Richard, actually, we are working right now to try to see what the data looks like based on the globally available reports. So we're currently trying to apply this and see. However, we're still working on this now. We're still rolling this out, and so I would guess that there might be things that we find that do need to be tweaked. In terms of the process for revising the methodology, we would again need to go back through this IAEG SDG. However, I believe that it would be flexible because we would probably not be making major changes, but more just tweaking the methodologies based on what we're actually seeing in the data. And this is something that, as I said, we're working on right now, and I think Richard presented in good detail on how we're doing this. And so this is something that's very much evolving, and then we will reassess. Additionally, some of these different initiatives, and GRI is, of course, one that people are thinking of probably, they're also involved in trying to improve the reporting that happens and improve the quality of that reporting. So that will put us in a better position to extract the information that we need on what countries are actually reporting. And it will also, sort of strengthen the linkage between the reporting that they're receiving and the ability of that report to be picked up in the SDG reporting because it now meets the criteria. I hope that helps to clarify.
Thank you very much, Gillian. And if I may, I'll just add one further element just for the framing and our thinking. One of the purposes we all had in designing the methodology was to make sure that we could capture as many efforts as possible, and we're not leaving anyone behind in terms of those who are making effort to report on their sustainability performance. So there might be aspects that at the beginning we will somehow shadow track and not necessarily use as a criteria to decide if to count or not. And maybe over time, once the quality improves and some of the practices get more widespread, we could become more sophisticated in deciding what to consider high quality, good quality sustainability reporting and what would not necessarily meet our expectations. But Fabienne, let me give the floor back to you so that we can address another question coming from the participants.
Sure, thank you very much. We have also a couple of very specific questions on the type of reports that can be included or reviewed. So maybe I will ask Cheryl to take the floor and ask the question that you had on reporting for voluntary sustainability standards. Cheryl, can you speak up and introduce yourself? So, okay, we cannot hear Cheryl, but maybe I can simply ask her question on her behalf. So the question is as follows. So for this SDG indicator, what or how would you recommend sustainability reporting for voluntary sustainability standards who are membership-based organizations? And she's adding that as a membership-based organization, the sustainability reporting has always been focused on global impacts through membership rather than on their direct impact, such as water, waste management, HR policy, carbon footprint at office, etc. So that's one question that's really specific on the type of report. And there was another question from Elena Ruski on whether the sustainability report included non-financial reports, such as the one that are mandatory in the European Union for stock companies.
Thank you, Fabienne. Hannah, may I ask you to take those questions? Hannah, can you hear us?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes. So on the first part, it actually sounds that it's a quite advanced way of reporting in many ways, which is a way that we would want to see reports move into, is to report on the actual impact of the organization, but not just only on sort of the sort of more static indicators. But I would still think, and maybe Richard would correct me if I'm wrong, that that for the report to be captured, we would still need to see some of the basic elements in there. So I think while it's very nice that there is a quite advanced report, we would still need to see sort of those basic or minimum requirements, or that those would be explained why it's not being reported. And that could be, as was stated, that that is because it's not really the focus of the company. So that might be captured in that way, but that's something that we'll also have to see with the testing of the global platform. Regarding the second part, could you just repeat, Fabienne, what the second part of the question was regarding the stock exchanges?
Yes, the question was whether my understanding is that whether the type of reports that is being considered or reviewed, included into the analysis, includes non-financial reports that are made mandatory for stock companies.
Yeah, absolutely. It falls under the same category of sustainability reports for sure. Yeah.
Thank you, Fabienne. Would we have, and thank you, Hannah, for the responses.
Sure.
Fabienne, would we have another question coming in?
Yes, absolutely. We have many questions, so I'm trying to synthesize and at the same time to give the floor. Like I said, we have also a number of questions on the collection of data itself and on the platform itself, the process. Questions on how this links to existing in-country reporting mechanisms, and also questions, for instance, from Faisal Al-Fadil. I'm going to give you the floor, Faisal, if you want to ask your question directly. And if you want to do so, please unmute yourself. And if not, it's okay. I know it can be challenging sometimes, especially in current circumstances. So the question from Faisal is whether there is a need for countries to give approval before companies actually submit their reports. So is approval from host country mandatory for business to submit reports? And also how is this mechanism linked with existing in-country reporting mechanisms?
Thank you, Fabienne. I'm checking whether Richard is connected to us and could address the question. Richard,
yes, sure.
Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes. Can you hear me?
Very well. Yes. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Yes. So as mentioned earlier, we have part of the data collection mechanism is to leverage not just existing global databases, but also in-country databases whenever available. So it's important to mention that only in some countries there are existing depositories. However, in many cases they're fragmented, and reports are only available through for specific sectors or industries. For that reason, in order to address those gaps, we have the option for submission, direct submission, which, as mentioned earlier, includes the option to upload the report if it's not available in any other public source, and also to submit their responses via survey. So this will enable us to cover the existing gaps that exist, particularly in some emerging and frontier countries.
Thank you very much, Richard. There is one point on of the question that was related to validation. And I'm wondering, Gillian, whether you have some thoughts, and I might ask also Elena to come in on this point.
Yeah, so I did want to say, one of the things that in the SDG process that is a requirement actually is that we send the data, any estimated data, back to the countries for validation. And for me, this is useful for a number of reasons. One is, hopefully this builds awareness of the data with the national partners that we have. But additionally, we know that there are national databases that we might want to connect to, but we just don't know these databases at the current time. And so national counterparts could provide us with advice on additional data sources that we could work to bring in the future. Additionally, some countries may have alternative information that they are collecting, and we are very much interested in understanding how that's being collected and learning from those experiences. Here there's a few things. One is, if the data that's being collected by a particular country is really being collected in a way that is useful for national monitoring but is quite different from the methodology that we have proposed, then of course this is useful for us to know, but we do need international comparability in the SDGs. And so this is something that we would not necessarily be able to bring in. However, it's good to know. And on the other hand, as I mentioned, if there's national repositories of corporate sustainability reporting, then this would be an additional source of information for us. And so, yeah, so through this validation process, hopefully it will be useful for us in terms of building this out and having a more comprehensive set of information. And hopefully it's also useful for the countries.
Thank you very much, Gillian. I wanted to check, Elena, whether there was any point that you wanted to add to this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Elisa. Absolutely. I agree with what was suggested by Gillian, but it also depends on which method the data was collected. So if we're talking about the direct submission and so-called government-driven approach by automated survey, that Richard referred to, then there may be no need for the validation because it has been controlled from scratch. But definitely, if we work with screening global data on national repositories, there may be this need, and then we can offer these opportunities to countries by request.
Thank you very much, Elena. Fabienne, I would want to give the opportunity to other participants to bring their question up.
Yes, please. I have a question from Elena Ruski on the added value of reporting for companies. Elena, you're unmuted, so if you would like to take the floor.
Yes, good morning and thank you very much. I'm Elena Rusci. from Italy, and I work at EY as a climate change and sustainability consultant. And I was, putting myself in the shoes of small and medium enterprises, and I was actually asking myself, but why a company should improve their sustainability reporting in order to align the report to the methodology of the UNEP? I mean, what's the concrete advantage for a company that has limited capital to align indicators to the indicators of the agenda? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. I'll ask whether Hannah and Elena would want to share that intervention.
I think this is a very good question, because we know that SMEs in general are not reporting as much as the larger companies, largely because of the reason that you just stated, that they don't have the capacity. So I think it's also important that they focus their reporting efforts on those areas where they find is the most relevant for them. And they may be surprised as how many areas might be still important for them to look into and to report on. And again, I think here is also important to note, as I noted in the presentation, that we do have the comply or explain principle. So if they really feel that they can only report on a few areas, and they, for example, are not emitting a lot of greenhouse gas emission, they don't have a lot of waste, they would just simply need to state that, but then focus on what are they, what is their impact, and they maybe go a bit further into the sort of what the impact they're having on sort of what their services are bringing out to society. And so it would maybe be a bit of a different kind of report, if you will, that is not as much of a tick the box indicator approach. This is just something that I think it would very much depend on the sector of the company and its situation. But I think personally, I think it's always a nice avenue to go into, is to try to understand better what impact the company is having. And I know also from personal experience that being an employee of a company that cares about these issues is often very motivated internally, and it also helps in improving internal management and detecting risks and opportunities. So these are just a few thoughts. But we definitely want more SMEs to report. So I thank you for working on that with us.
Thank you, Anna. And Elena, would you want to complement?
Yes, just a bit from my side. I think it's a very relevant question. Thank you so much for asking. We definitely do not want to impose a lot of pressure to SMEs, but I think the main incentive could be raising visibility, because as Hannah explained, and we touched on that, this comply or explain functionality, it helps basically to be more flexible for the threshold criteria, and to enable inclusion of SMEs within the country reporting capacities. So for me, I think it is raising visibility, which could be appreciated by small companies.
Maybe just to add to that point, as we know, they're becoming more requirements, supplier requirements. So often smaller companies are supplying to larger companies that will have a requirement, for example, of a sustainability report that would perhaps address a few specific indicators. So that is also an important factor to point out.
Yeah, I would like to add something there, if that's okay.
Please, Richard. Yes, sure.
Yes. So one recent benefit we're seeing from this improved transparency is we've seen that there's a lot of interest from sustainable investors and institutional investors when looking at companies and assessing their risk-return impact equation. So this improved reporting and transparency can have a material impact on companies' valuation and the assessment of responsible investors. In addition, these can provide data that can be used for corporate strategy to better guide their direction of the company in a way that's more economically sustainable and advantageous in the long term.
Thank you very much, Richard, for adding this element. And maybe just a close-up point. One of the aspects that we have been seeing while engaging with some of the countries that have moved ahead and started to create some experience around tracking the indicator is that they have also created some tools that ease the process of reporting of companies of all size. So the fact of shedding more light on the issue of corporate sustainability reporting has also generated some positive dynamics that SMEs can take advantage of and not only tick the box of being counted vis-a-vis this indicator, but also make sure that they are better positioned in their value chain on markets that have a growing sustainability requirement and, as Richard was saying, vis-a-vis the finance community. Fabienne, are there other questions coming in that we can still take within the time of the webinar?
Yeah, we still have 10 minutes, so I'd say that we can maybe take another 3 questions, and we have more and more questions coming in, but I want to just encourage everybody to continue the conversation, obviously, after the webinar. But for the time being, maybe can I ask Paloma Zapata to take the floor? You have a question on SMEs and reporting and their capacity to do that. You're self-muted, so if you would like to take the floor, yes, please go ahead and please introduce yourself, Paloma.
Hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Paloma Zapata. I'm CEO of Sustainable Travel International, and I have worked under the 10YFP framework in developing a reporting mechanism for small island states in the South Pacific to actually report on this specific SDG indicator. And from my experience, there was a lot of disparity in between the data collection mechanism and reporting across businesses, SMEs I'm speaking about. And there is also limited capacities across these SMEs to dedicate to actually to reporting. And finally, there was also some resistance in reporting some of the different indicators. So my question to you is, are these have you seen the same issues? How is it being addressed? And finally, are there opportunities for supporting organizations to be included in this program to support destinations in training and preparing for reporting?
Thank you, Paloma. Helena, would you want to touch upon this question, and then eventually Hannah and myself can complement? Elena, can you hear us?
Please unmute yourself.
Well, let's maybe start then from Hannah and myself. Hannah, would there be something you would want to comment on this question?
Yeah, I think well, we already spoke about some of those issues earlier, and we have to acknowledge that many SMEs are not reporting for exactly these reasons, because it does take time, it does take some funds, and it can be a bit hard, to be honest. So I think, for example, well, Elisa mentioned that there have been some developments within the countries to support SMEs. And for example, in Colombia, they have designed a data platform that allows SMEs to directly enter their data into a program, which then generates the report. So that already, a system like that can be very helpful if that is possible within a country to develop something like that. That's one example. And you mentioned also the trainings, and I think it's very important that that there are trainings available. Sort of there's quite a bit of material available, for example, on the GRI website and other the UN Global Compact that can help companies to start. And it doesn't have to be very difficult to take the first step, and then you can build on that with time. So I think it's great to encourage SMEs, but at the same time we understand that it's difficult and maybe getting more difficult maybe in these times. So we'll have to see how that develops.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm just checking again with Elena whether she can hear us.
Yes, I'm so sorry. For some reason, it was not possible to unmute, but I'm happy to comment on that. Basically, by the survey mechanism, we actually planned to explore what are the constraints and what are the challenges of the SMEs, and maybe this exactly comply or explain function, we will modify it in more details, allowing SMEs to answer certain questions. If they don't respond to the question, what is the challenge? If they're struggling with certain metrics or with understanding the measurement methodology of individual indicators. And yes, and also, as I mentioned, we have a number of capacity building and technical assistance projects within the development account, both for led by UNCTAD and UNEP as well, on working with the private sector, including SMEs, on how to enhance the quality of sustainability reporting.
Thank you, Elena. Fabienne, do we have a next question to address?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, just hold on one second, Faisal. I'm going to give you the floor.
Okay.
But yeah, just to ask everybody, can you please ask your question, short questions, and I'm going to ask the same from speakers, if you can provide also short answers as much as possible so we can take another 2 or 3 questions. Thanks. Please, Faisal, go ahead and please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. This is Faisal Al-Farul. I'm the founder of HGBF. It's a Saudi Green Building Forum. We are an NGO in consultative status with United Nations. Thank you guys so much. This is probably one of the most important webinars I have ever attended because of the issue and because of building capacity. Thank you so much for the One Planet to put this together, as well as for the UN MP, all the colleagues and all the guests and speakers. To make it very short, please, it's so important for building capacities for local, national, non-governmental organization to get engaged for best practice, for best delivery practice report. We don't know how to get engaged. Today, I have learned some things about some champions within the 12.6 reporting. I've been searching for this for a long time. So please, if there's any way that in the future that even Hannah, she was saying something very important, that some people had really good business models, I think in South America or somewhere. We would love to adopt these kind of small reporting, like easy reporting, like questionnaire reporting, would make really big difference to move the private sector closer to what the governments are doing. And also one thing I'd like to say, not all national committees for VNRs, they are committed with the local businesses or with the local NGOs. So there's a gap of information and gap of delivering. We see big, huge companies like Aramco, SABIC, and a lot of companies in Saudi Arabia report with tons of mistakes, and it's unbelievable. Maybe because they don't know how to report SDGs, or maybe because the consultants are not giving them the correct, or maybe I don't know what's going on. But definitely, I believe, as a recommendation to this panel, please help the NGOs to have or to build a fair practice for everybody, because they really can do a good building capacity. Again, thank you for One Planet, my champions, and everybody else. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I know the time is tight. Thank you.
Hi, may I address this? This is Madeline. I am Richard's partner. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Yes,
hear
yes,
you.
I can hear you. Yes, please.
Hi, Faisal. You had sent to me an email, and I was planning on responding to you. As the former vice president and treasurer of the World Bank, we've done a lot of work with you guys in Saudi Arabia. And as also a former a CEO of SASB, I am very familiar with all of the different standards and standard setters. One way I would suggest that perhaps you may want to think about how to start is UNCTAD actually has what they call global core indicators. And if you go onto the web and look at the guidance on global core indicators for entity reporting, that's a very, very comprehensive way of you being able to start. Obviously, you don't have to fill out all of the requirements, but that really lays it out with respect to all of the different categories, so economic, environmental, social, and so on. And then it gives many of the components. And so even doing some of those is better than doing nothing, because it's very nicely well structured. So I would suggest you could look at the global core indicators. Again, if you go onto the web, there it's called the Guidance on Core Indicators for Entity Reporting. And that is one of the foundations of which we are using in terms of measuring, compliance and adherence in this 12.6.1, because obviously when we're programming the computers, as Richard had mentioned, we need some kind of reference on measurement, and that's one of the guiding tools that we're using.
I'm sorry, your kind speaker, your name and also the link, if you can send me. And you have mentioned something about Global Compact. Is this what you're talking about?
No, I mentioned the global core indicators. My name is Madeline Antonsic.
Madeline, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
You sent me an email. I will forward to you the web. It's actually UNCTAD, who is obviously involved in this process, has come up with these global core indicators through a multi-year process with lots of stakeholders involved, and many countries now are adopting this. So I will send to you the link.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Elisa, sorry.
Thank you very much. Not a problem, Fabienne. I actually wanted to thank you for digging out as many questions as possible. I'm actually cognizant that we have reached the hour and 15 that had been reserved for the webinar. So I would not want the webinar to be cut before being able to thank again the Secretariat of the One Planet Network for having given us the opportunity to be interacting with all of you today. And thank all of you for the very nice discussions that we had during the webinar today. Maybe ask all of you that have been connected to help us disseminate the knowledge and the information that was shared in the course of the webinar. We're not sure the extent to which a recently approved methodology is very widespread. So we will ask you to become our ambassadors in conveying the information that you have learned today in the course of the webinar. And we will definitely make sure that the presentation that was used today as a basis for our exchange will be made available to all of you. Once again, thank you, Fabienne, for having hosted us, and a special thank to all the speakers and panelists for the session, for their effort in conveying the messages across this methodology and engaging with the public in very detailed exchanges. Thank you very much to everybody, and good continuation of the day and afternoon, depending on where you are.